Hi, I'm Scott Crist, Fire Management Officer for the Shawnee National Forest. I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 Illinois Native Plant Society Annual Symposium. The Forest Service is proud to once again sponsor and support the Native Plant Society and their annual symposium. I hope you find this symposium educational, invigorating, and exciting and helps develop that love for native plants. The Forest Service has many unique areas with unique plant assemblages, and these occur on other lands all throughout Illinois. So whether it's on the Shawnee National Forest or anywhere in our state, I hope you get out and enjoy our native plants this year. Thank you. I'd like to talk today about growing season burns. This is a program the Forest Service hasn't been doing very long, but it's another way to manipulate our environment. So I'd like to present today some of the things that we found and discovered in the time we've been doing it. What do we mean when we say a growing season burn? Well, there's a lot of different definitions that are out there. Some might say growing season just means when plants are growing. Think about that though. Some plants are growing almost year round, or in some stages of green. Other definitions you might see is when dominant vegetation is growing or when herbaceous vegetation is actively growing. A lot of growing season burn literature comes from the Great Plains, and a definition I've seen from there is when warm season herbaceous plants are actively growing. That's actually the closest to the definition that I'll be using for this talk. Specifically, we're referring to late growing season burns in this capacity. And why is the warm season herbaceous plants, why does that matter? Well, we're only doing these in grassy environments, and those are the dominant plants in those areas. So for us, when I say late growing season, that's generally going to be August through maybe early October, prior to first frost, where plants senescence for the year. Why do we do growing season burns? I think it's a question to ask. The community has come a long way from where all fire was bad, decades ago, to where fire is a natural and a vital component to the landscape. Well, in this particular case, we had been doing dormant season burning in some grassy or open areas with the idea of controlling woody species from encroaching in it. We weren't always satisfied with the results of those burns. We would still get woody resprouts time after time, or sometimes they would just withstand the burn and not even resprout. And there is a fairly large body of research that suggests that growing season fires are more effective in woody control. This picture on the right is from the state of Illinois tract. You can see the grass component, but plenty of trees that have encroached into this unit. There's a lot of tree seed pressure in this unit. This had been burned a number of times, and we pretty much were getting the same result every time. A different part of this same burn unit, even after running a few fires through there, we were basically overrun with woody sprouts. And as you can see, the warm season grass component had actually decreased over time, and so our ability to get a hot fire in there had decreased. Well, there's other reasons to do growing season burns. We wanted to increase the forb diversity and forb content in some of our open lands. In some of our burns, as in the Johnson County landfill burn, it had been burned 7 times in 10 years and still dominated by warm season grass, which of course is a good plant to have. We wanted to get a little bit more forbs into there for improved browse and forage for wildlife. Growing season fires may reduce that warm season grass dominance, and some grasses and flowers bloom better or best after a growing season burn. Along with increasing forb content and decreasing woody encroachment, we thought growing season burns might be more effective at reducing non-native invasive species. Growing season burns have been suggested as a treatment for Sericea lespedeza by numerous authors. They also might be more effective at reducing microstegium in various stands. Given their late seed set, some of the research suggests that perhaps a summer burn could consume or sterilize seeds. And if they're good at targeting native woody species, maybe they would be good at targeting non-native woody species, such as autumn olive or multiflora rose. And we have some of that in several of our open lands. Some research just shows that native plants on aggregate have a higher tolerance, so a lower heat combustion level. One more reason we might do growing season burns: a lot of the written accounts of Native American burning and early pioneer burning suggests that most burning occurred in late summer or fall. Spring burning is actually an artifact of Euro-American settlement, so that a lot of our native plants probably evolved with frequent late summer or fall burning. This is backed up by some of the tree ring research that's out there. Most of the records don't discuss whether a fire happened in the dormant season or the growing season, but of the few that do, it seems that between 75 and maybe 90% of the fires did occur in the dormant season. But of course that means 10 to 25% occurred in the growing season. So there's more historical precedent for that as well. There's some more reasons to do growing season burns. We wanted to expand the number of suitable burn days a year. My estimates are that you may have 15 to 25 good burn days in the typical burn window. So October to early April maybe. And that's days where it's dry enough, you have the appropriate weather conditions, wind directions, things like that, where the fuels will take it, and yet not be too volatile. So we thought if there's some portion of our burns we can do outside of this season, that saves us some days to get more burning done elsewhere, because most managers have far more things they'd like to burn than they have the resources, the time, the people, the equipment to do. Also, we're a wildfire agency as well, and we do occasionally get wildfires in the growing season, and we had noticed some differences in some of the vegetation response. The picture I'm showing here is from the Hard Times 2 wildfire in southern Union County. This occurred in late April after a late hard freeze. Froze everything. We kind of went back into fire season, but of course everything had greened up, but there was a new crop of leaves on the ground. This fire started, we put it out, and I just happened to be back there 3 years later, and I noticed you could still see easily where the fire was. That's not always the case on a dormant season fire. This particular picture, you can see there's an ash that was top killed, but it doesn't look like it's sprouting 3 years later. There is some spice bush that's there, and you can see behind it an oak, and that oak was also top killed, but now it's got an equal footing, a competitive, improved position compared to where it was probably suppressed underneath that ash earlier. At the top of the hill, this kind of knob here had been really thick with sumac and young trees, and 3 years later it was mostly herbaceous plants. There were some woodies in there as well, but clearly a marked difference in kind of the canopy, if you will. From the literature, if range management is your thing, in the Great Plains they're doing a lot of growing season burns to improve livestock forage. So I think the general idea here is uh, burning any time will make green succulent growth come back. However, that fades over time as the plants kind of harden off for the year. If you burn later, then you get a second flush of green and succulent forage, and a lot of the research shows increased weight gain by cattle that are grazing on summer burned pastures. Well, if it's good for cows, it will probably also help some of our native grazers as well, wildlife grazers. Quail and turkey frequently cited as needing a mixture of dormant and growing season burns because they have different effects that will give both some dense cover for nesting, but also some open areas for foraging and taking poults. Baum and Sharber had a paper there where a summer burn caused a resprout of milkweed. And so when the fall migrating monarchs came through, they found fresh succulent milkweed rather than kind of old and milkweed that had already senesced for the year. So some thinking that a growing season burn may have been missing from our wildlife management repertoire for several years. In the pictures here, you can see both a milkweed sprouting after an early September burn, and then not only were the seed pods not consumed, they're still open, and those seeds can now land in a nice open prepared seed bed. So the Shawnee's burn program, we first started doing growing season burns in 2017. We'd been interested in it for several years prior to that. When we heard there were some of our partners at Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Southern Illinois Prescribed Burn Association were also interested in it, and in many cases already doing it, we began with our first planned burns. We actually planned them for 2016, didn't get to it. So 2017 was our first year. Our forest plan restricts any burning until after August 15th to protect ground nesting birds. We're limited to non-forested areas or areas that don't have suitable bat roost trees. And this is also from our forest plan and the biological opinion that we're trying to protect potential roost trees for Indiana bats and also for northern long-eared bats. So for the Shawnee, what this means is that we're actually doing these on old fields. So these are previously farmed row cropped areas for the most part that have either been planted or let go, and we then have been managing them, trying to get them back to a healthy grass or grass shrub environment for wildlife that need that habitat, which we don't have a lot of in southern Illinois. Another reason we end up doing ours a little later than perhaps DNR, who may start as early as July. We're a wildfire agency as well, as I mentioned earlier, so in August most of our primary fire personnel are out of state fighting wildfires. And for this program, all the burn units we are dealing with have had a previous history of dormant season fires, either wildfire or prescribed fire or both. And this is, I think, a detriment. Something I would like to have had is to be able to take an area that has experienced neither a dormant season or a growing season fire, sample that, and then resample that as a comparison, but we don't have that available on the Shawnee. So our primary objectives are to reduce the woody encroachment into open lands and increase forb cover to maintain and enhance our early cereal or grassland or grass shrub habitat. To gauge the effects on these burns, we established some plots prior to burning, and then we've remeasured them in many cases. Photo on the right is one of our pre-burn plot that was shown pre-burn in 2017. pretty graph maybe, but just showing the growth of our program. Our first year we did 3 burns, on three days of burning, 1 unit each day, for 57 acres. The second year we were pleased enough with the results. We found a little better areas to do it in and dialed in when we should be doing it a little better. So we did 4 burn units over the span of 6 days. And by the third year in 2019, we did 6 burn units, but it was over the span of 9 days and for 900 acres. So first I'm going to show one of the sites, and you had just seen the pre-burn plot earlier for the Ashby burn unit. This did get a growing season burn, but it wasn't until after it had been measured 3 times and had a dormant season burn. So what we saw here, and you're going to see this a lot, it shows a very high shrub percentage. So this is just the life forms, forbs, graminoid shrubs, trees, vines, and litter. This little star by it I'm going to explain here because you're going to see that over and over. Sericea lespedeza is treated differently in different sources. So according to the guidebook that the guy that was doing these plots had, he decided to call it a shrub. So it's listed under the shrubs, and that was our dominant shrub, end quote, in many of these plots. So it wasn't 66 or 67% autumn olive or something like that. Most of that was Sericea lespedeza. So in 2017, most of the plot was non-native plants, almost 87%, native plants making up the remainder. Of those native or non-native plants, rather, almost all of that was Lespedeza. Those of you who have open lands probably are battling Lespedeza to this day. We also saw some Japanese honeysuckle in there. So this plot was measured in 2017. We did a dormant season burn in February of 2018. Then it was remeasured in 2018 and again in 2019. So here's the results. If we look on the left, the Lespedeza cuneata, as the Sericea lespedeza, the dormant season burn did reduce it in the first year, but by the second year it was actually had expanded higher than it was before the burn. The Japanese honeysuckle seemed to be reduced and eliminated, but then it was back as well in year 2 in 2019. The multiflora rose was at very low levels. It was still present in 2018, but curiously not in 2019. So the most woody of these species seem to have the strongest, though very, it was a minimal amount of plants there, reaction to the dormant season burn, which a little bit contrary to what we might have thought. When we look at the trees per acre, again, red is 2017, yellow is 2018, and blue is 2019. We saw a decrease in live persimmon, in a couple others, which was then somewhat regained in year 2. We did pick up some dead persimmon by the second year post-burn, so 2019. For white ash, we actually saw more after the dormant season burn, and then that fell back a little bit. However, by 2019, we had a lot of dead white ash. For winged sumac, we didn't have any initially that were recorded. We recorded some in 2018 after the dormant season burn and a little bit more in 2019. We also did pick up some dead sumac in 2019. Autumn olive, it appeared in 2018 and then disappeared. Sweet gum is actually thought a study from Clemson that showed dormant season burning actually encourages it. It sprouts and it seems to do better. In this case, we had a little bit in 2017, but after the dormant season burn, we didn't record it again. The 2TD, that is just undetermined dead deciduous plants. So after the dormant season burn, we did have a lot of dead stems we couldn't identify. Something else that may be worth mentioning, winged elm and hop hornbeam. We had in 2017 pre-burn. We didn't have after the dormant season burn, and we didn't pick it up 2 years later either. So that was kind of the effects of a dormant season burn, maybe a little surprising. Now let's talk about McConnell. This was a growing season fire that we did in 2017. On the left, I'm showing the total life form composition, again, dominated by shrubs, and that shrub layer itself was dominated by Sericea lespedeza. This unit was mostly native plants. About 11% were non-native, and of that 11%, almost all of that was Lespedeza. A little bit of multiflora rose. And here's what that looks like. Here's our plot here, and you can see some goldenrod, some Lespedeza, some partridge pea, and some winged elm in the background. So this picture was taken in August of 2017 when the plot was measured. We burned it in September of 2017 and then remeasured it in August of 2018 and August of 2019. So here is the fire in September of 2018. And what you can see here is typical of a growing season fire. Lower, slower flame lengths and rates of spread. What we call a dirty burn, in that it's patchy, parts burn and parts don't, leaving some unconsumed vegetation. Frequently it will burn just the base of the plants and then leave the tops intact, and sometimes they'll bend over since their base has been weakened. So from a distance it may not even look like it burned. It's when you get up close and you can look at the ground to see that it did. Well, I went back about 3 months later and took some photos, and before I explain these, this unit is a little bit different than some of our others. This hadn't had a dormant season burn in a number of years, unlike most of our other ones that have been burned every 2 or 3 years. So this had a higher thatch buildup. We also tried to burn it in early September of 2017. Those of you may remember the big Gatlinburg fire in the fall of 2016. Fall of 2016 was very dry around here. Fall of 2017 was also dry. So between a lot of thatch buildup and a very dry fall, we ended up putting out the test fire the first time we tried to burn this unit, because it actually burned across our mow lines and into the woods. Conventional wisdom is that the shade of the forest will put out a growing season fire. And while that is most of the time true, it was not always true. A few weeks later, though, we had had some rain, some cooler temperatures. We were able to do this fire and keep it controlled. But just interesting aside about this one. So some of the results, this is from December of 2017. You can see the black on the winged elm and goldenrod and blackberry in the unit. You can also see some warm and cool season grasses sprouting, as well as some native forbs in the unit. And that was our kind of early just walkthrough monitoring. Here's what the data showed. And again, I have the 2017 life forms up there just to show how it was. If we look just at forbs, we didn't have a lot pre-burn, which is the red, 2017. But in August of 2018, when we went back to measure, now we had a lot more forbs. By 2019, the forb content had dropped off a little bit, but it was still much higher than we started with. Graminoids, there weren't a lot in this part of the unit to begin with. We still didn't see any after 3 years. The shrub component, and again, that's mostly Lespedeza, but there's also autumn olive in there and some other shrubs as well. Markedly reduced after the growing season fire. We didn't record any shrubs in 2018 in the plot anyway. A little bit in 2019, which were probably sprouts or new seedlings in. There weren't a lot of trees in the plot. It didn't seem to affect them much. And by 2019, we actually were recording more trees in the plot. We looked just at invasives. We did see a big decrease in Lespedeza the first year post growing season fire. By the second year, however, it had regained most of what it lost after that growing season fire. When we look at Japanese honeysuckle, we didn't have any pre-fire. We didn't have any 1 year after fire, but we did pick up a little bit the second year post-burn. If we look at trees per acre, the 2TD is just undetermined dead stems, deciduous stems. We couldn't tell what they were. There were none pre-burn, and we did pick up quite a bit in 2018, and even more in 2019. That could be some delayed mortality. We didn't have any dead persimmon. We did in 2018, but we had less in 2019. And perhaps some of these that we thought were dead in 2018 actually sprouted by the second year. Perhaps this was whereas the dead stems had just rotted and fallen over and now weren't counted as a stem, but were just part of the litter. Winged elm follows the same pattern. Didn't have any dead ones prior to the fire, and we had a lot after that. And that effect was somewhat lasting, although a little less in 2019. Interesting, when we look at live persimmon, we actually had more after the growing season fire in year 1, and then none in year 2. Similarly, live winged elm, live white ash, hop hornbeam, and sweet gum, we all had pre-burn, but after the growing season fire, we didn't record any in the next 2 years for those live forms. So it looks like the growing season fire was indeed effective at knocking out some of the woodies in the plot. And here's a picture of what that plot looked like afterwards. You can see the dead stems from the winged elm in the background, and goldenrod and partridge pea and some Lespedeza in the foreground. So Pinnabar was another burn. We have 5 plots in there. They've all been burned. 3 of them were burned in 2019, and because of COVID, we didn't get back to resample those. So this is just plots 1 and 2. Plot 1 only had grasses and forbs. Plot 2 had some woodies. But here is kind of when we lumped those plots 1 and 2, what they looked like. Some persimmon and some autumn olive. Again, high shrub component, more forbs and grasses, about 30% here. About half native and non-native, and of that non-native portion, again, driven by Lespedeza. This is what it looked like pre-burn. This is plot 1, I believe. That was the sights and sounds of the growing season burn. Here's what it looked like in December, and you can see the kind of browned out stems of blackberry and goldenrod and some vines. I believe it was honeysuckle. Also some sprouting of some grasses and forbs. Again, dirty burn. You can see in the background the part that we didn't burn, a little brighter or yellow there on the picture on the left. Well, here's what the data showed. Again, big increase in forbs that then backed off year 2 post-fire. For graminoids, we did have some here. We didn't record the first year after fire, but we recorded an increase in the second year. And we saw a big shrub layer decrease that stayed in year 2. When we look at Lespedeza, again, a big increase after 1 year after the growing season fire. But it regained and even gained a little in the second year post-fire. We also did pick up a little bit of stiltgrass, microstegium, second year post-fire, and then the multiflora rose was really a non-factor here. When we look at trees per acre, again we picked up some unidentified dead stems. The live persimmon decreased a lot post-fire in the first year, but then dramatically increased the second year due to sprouting and perhaps an influx of new plants. We did record by the second year some dead persimmon, had some white ash that seeded in but didn't last, and then some autumn olive that was there pre-burn, and we didn't record it in the 2 years afterwards. So that also helps explain some of the reduction. So West Tract is another burn unit with 5 plots. 2 of them were burned in 2018, the rest in 2019, and again we didn't have the data collected for 2019 in 2020 because of COVID. So this data was pooled a little bit, so rather than just show some more bar graphs, I'm going to invite you into what a growing season burn looks like for those that haven't been on one, and I'm just going to play a few short videos.
While we're looking at high-end fire behavior in the background, more typical, it's just kind of a dirty burn, lots of green, lots of stuff that burned the bottom of the grass, didn't really consume the whole plant, very slow moving. And then that's back to what they burned yesterday. And you can hear it snapple cracking along. That's while we're looking at high-end fire behavior in the background. West Tract, September 20th. Autumn olive torching out. It's cooking through a bunch back over here as well. Lots of heat. This is even looks like it's putting some heat on those sycamores. Not that anybody will try it. Those are knocked out. Big invaders. And here's some heat that a little autumn olive. You'll see how wilted and set the leaves, but that one could resprout. Down there, a little more heat impact. Again, didn't totally black it out. We're seeing lots of good effects on the fire in the autumn olive and other shrubs. Much hotter than we actually anticipated, I would say.
Getting out of the way before it gets hot.
More typical, just kind of a dirty burn, lots of green. So there may be some drought stress. KBDI 540-ish, I want to say, for this area. So you can see some leaves, that's what's backing. It's leaf litter off of those sycamores that we saw in the last video, the last couple videos. So some of them have been falling due to drought. That's a continuous, long duration, long residence time line of fire. Whatever torched out was on the other side of this timber stringer. You suspect a cedar, but I actually can't see any cedar from here.
Strip along the line over here, only one.
Lots of stuff that burned the bottom of the grass. Didn't really consume the whole plant. Very slow moving.
Well, I guess that last video wasn't going to play, and I apologize to anybody that got car sick as I was walking around videoing it. We're not the only one doing growing season burns, as I mentioned before. So this text and photos come from Jody Shemp from some of the work that has been going on elsewhere with DNR, Southern Illinois Burn Association, RC&D, and on some private lands. So 11 days after a growing season burn in early September, you're seeing native herbaceous plants resprouting. One thing he recorded is that a lot of the seed heads are still intact. Like I said, a lot of times the base of the plant burns, but not the seed head or the flower stalk. And so what that means is that seed may still be viable, and in some cases it even droops, and now it falls into a ready seed bed for it, nice and blackened and full of nutrients, and with a lot of the competing mulch out of the way. 21 days after a growing season fire, we see good growth on warm season grasses and native forbs and other herbaceous plants. You can even see that it didn't consume all of the litter layer. There are patches of bare ground, but then there's also patches of either grass or leaves that were left, not consumed by the fire. When does a growing season burn work best? Now that we've done 12 days of this and 1,300 acres, when we've charted a lot of things, there seem to be some things that lead towards success more than others. One, high temperatures. Our best burning temperatures have been 88, 94. And that makes sense. If you think about it, if the cambium temperature that you're trying to get to a certain 60 degrees C, or whatever it is to kill that cambium, if it's already hot, the fire doesn't have to do that much work to raise that temperature to that lethal level. The drawback of that, of course, is that same heat is hard on you and your crew. So plenty of fluids, take breaks, rotate, and also don't bite off more than you can chew. We found that 40 or 50 acres a day is a good day's work for growing season burns. We have done some where we've gotten more, but I think we generally plan on 40 or 50 acres a day. Another thing that helps is if there is some thatch or some dead grass or material from prior seasons, at least 2 growing seasons worth of fuel. Because what is burning in these fires? It's 2 things. One, it's going to be the dead grass and forbs and vines and whatnot from prior years, but it's also going to be this year's growth that has gone through enough of its life cycle that its live fuel moisture is lower and it can be available to burn. So what that means is lower RH is going to give you lower fine dead fuel moisture. So for your dead grass, your thatch, less than 10% seem to be where we liked it to be. 7 to 9% seems to be about the lowest we've burned it with it yet. But those did better than when we had 10, 11, 12% 1 hour fuel moisture. And then for the live herbaceous moisture, didn't really burn very well until we hit about 130% live moisture. It started to burn a lot better around 125%. And as it gets lower, it's getting closer and closer to being like a dormant season fuel. So that also kind of makes sense. The 2 pictures on the right, September 20th, 94 degrees that day. I think our RH was down into the lower mid 40s. We had a little bit of wind. Fine deads were 7.4%, I believe, and our live fuel moisture was right around 125. And so what you see here on the left picture, an autumn olive completely torched. We saw some of that in the video. On the right, it's some sassafras that had seeded in. That sassafras is a prolific sprouter, and everybody that's burned it knows that. Maybe the growing season burn will do something a little more permanent to keep it out. I haven't been back to that exact spot. So overall, the results I would say for our growing season burns, they do seem to be effective on knocking back the woody encroachment, even on some larger stems. There is a little bit of a life form shift, but it's relatively small, and it seems to be ephemeral. Like the forb, we saw a huge increase in forb content, a little bit less by year 2. and it's going to be related to the species and the site. However, we can also say we're not causing massive negative shifts in life form. So we're not getting, totally losing our forb component or our graminoid component where we had it. The effects to invasive species can be dramatic, and they can be very ephemeral or really not much of an effect at all. So again, depends on the site, depends on the species. There seems to be lots of interannual variation, and that's due to precipitation, seed banking, etc. So sometimes this effect may outweigh the treatment effect, whether it was a dormant season fire, growing season fire, or what have you. Another thing to consider, these burns are real patchy. So you might have really great effects, and then 10 feet over, no effect at all. Well, you may have killed all the seed consumed or whatever of your Lespedeza, but if there's a nearby seed source right next to it, it can easily seed back in. That same thing means it's actually probably better from a habitat standpoint because there's plenty of refugia within your burn unit, and also for those critters that need that diversity, a thick place to nest, but then an open place for foraging, they get that within the same unit. So, not all bad. But if you burn, a 50-acre unit, on average, I would say maybe 50 or 60% black is about normal. We have had certainly more, and some of the pictures I've shown have shown higher percentages where it burned really well over an extended patch. But just think about that you're, you're only treating a portion of your unit. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, thanks for your time and interest in growing season burns.